When did Noelle come into the picture? Obviously, she's Mick Foley's daughter. She's been a wrestling fan obviously her entire life. She was born and raised on it. But there is a part of her too that kind of like joined the Avengers group. She joined the band. Yeah. She was a part of the Superfan group for a bit. She was at every show. Everybody knows who Noelle is. How did that all happen? How did you two get introduced to each other?
Yeah. So weird story. This was back in 2013. So really, like I said, from 2011 to 2013, I was going to almost every single pay-per-view. Like literally, I went through it like a couple days ago. I was talking to somebody on the phone, and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna go back through those years. And I was like, okay, I went to this. Like I went to more pay-per-views that I didn't go to from that span. So at this point, like people really, really knew who I was. And now my social media was a thing. So with that said, it was a Raw in Des Moines, Iowa in 2013. I had never been in Des Moines, Iowa before. It's probably a 5.5 hour drive from me. And I literally like the night before, 2 nights before, this lady Val, who I don't even know if I've seen her since then, to be honest. And she was like, you know, somebody I met through going to shows, and like, you know, it was just like a friend, but like more like an acquaintance to a degree, because I didn't see her very often. We didn't really keep contact, but she texted me because she knew I was crazy enough to go on short notice to drive to Des Moines, Iowa. She's like, hey, I have an extra front row seat to Raw. Do you want to go? And I'm like, yeah, all right, I'll go. So I hit up the Brock Lesnar guy, and I'm like, you want to go to Raw? And he's like, yeah, I'll go. I'm like, okay. And that's literally all it took. So I really had to find him to drive out there. So I forced him to drive. So we drove out there. We drove out there together, and he got a ticket that day, and I had my ticket with her. So it was front row camera side on the television side. So I expected to get moved, right? Because every single time I get moved. So we sit down in the seats. I'm waiting. I'm looking around. I know who's going to come and get me. I see him. He's looking at me. He's not coming over to get me. I'm like, all right, whatever. They're going to let me live tonight. So whatever. So the show opened up with Triple H. It was during the time when he was leading up to feud with Daniel Bryan. And where Orton was the champion, I think, right for SummerSlam. And after he cashed the Money in the Bank. And he opened up the show, and he's cutting a promo on, why do people like Daniel Bryan? I don't get it. Why does everyone love Daniel Bryan? And then he's basically saying, like, you fans love stupid wrestlers. You love stupid gimmicks. And he went into saying, you guys like Doink the Clown, didn't you? You all love Doink the Clown. And he goes, especially you. You love Doink the Clown. He's pointing right at me. And they put me on a tight shot. They had never done this in all my shows. And I was at hundreds of shows, literally hundreds. They had never just filmed me. Nobody else purposely. If anything, they
found a way to use the clown.
And it was weird because it opened the show. So in my mind, I'm thinking Triple H must have saw me beforehand and was like, oh, okay, maybe I'll use this in the promo. And they film me, and I'm like going like this, like, oh, I'm selling it. I get it. Don't look into the camera. Sell it. Get them the reaction they want.
You're already like pro'd out to how to do this. You're ready.
I knew everything at this point. Like I knew everything, how they worked their production and everything. So after the show, so they didn't move me the whole night, and I just thought it was weird. So after the show, I get a tweet, and I remember walking out of the venue with Brock Lesnar guy, and like, hell, Mick Foley's daughter just tweeted me. I'm like, she's kind of hot, But at the time, Noelle had 1,000 Twitter followers, maybe. She was 19. She was not. Nobody knew who she was. Other than
she was before the blow up. This is before where she's like a social media influencer now.
Way before.
Because even when I first met her, she was still blowing up, and it was just she was Mick Foley's daughter, and you had to be like a really hardcore wrestling fan to know that. Right.
If you watch Beyond the Match, she was the girl to nipples. Yeah, like that's what she was, and she didn't have a social media presence at all. So
Pre Foley and everything.
It was way before. Yeah. So so. I look at my phone. I'll never forget. I literally said, I'm like, oh, she's pretty hot. Yeah, I'll follow her. And she tweeted me saying, I always wondered who that clown in the crowds at WWE shows were. And now I know it's, at Frank WWE Clown. She's like, you worked that wig. And I'm like, okay, that's pretty funny. So I quote tweeted or whatever it was back then. And I said, I worked that wig for you, Noelle. I worked that wig for you. I never had any engagement, any interaction.
If there's one thing I can take from this before you continue is that a lot of your story just is you having the balls to be you and just let me see what happens. I'm gonna do it and then we'll see what happens. Like act and ask for forgiveness later. Like,
hey, what's the worst they can say is no, right? So so I follow her. We exchanged tweets back and forth for a couple of weeks, right? I didn't immediately bombard her, and it was kind of a thing at the time, on social media. For those who are paying attention, we're like, oh, they see something building here. We're being very flirtatious.
Yeah.
I'll probably take it a little bit too far on my end. I was being very sexually innuendos and all that. Not straightforward, but just very subtle stuff that was out there. And
I think we're all like that in our early 20s. As you get older, you're like, oh, that was pretty racy.
Right, exactly. Like, yeah, some of those tweets would dig them up now. I'd be like, but so we tweet each other for a couple of weeks, and then eventually I slide into the DMs. I ask for her number. She does not give it to me. She says, let's DM here on Twitter first. This will be the in-between thing. So we DM on Twitter for a couple weeks again. Eventually, she coughs up the number, and we're texting. Then we start FaceTiming. We talked for roughly 6 months, September, and I ended up flying out there in January. So in January 2014, I went to the Rumble, which was in Pittsburgh, and then I flew to New York to surprise her. So at this point, we were talking every day. You know, it wasn't like I was some strange man going out there. So I flew out there.
Built a relationship at this point.
Absolutely. And so I arranged with like her best friend that they were going to support. You know, they're going to take her out to lunch. I was going to show up. So I was kind of being weird in the days before, so she kind of saw it coming because I was like, "What are you doing on this day?" Like I was being really obvious because I was excited. And then so eventually I flew out there, nervous, obviously, because this is like it could be a pivotal moment in my life, which it was. And we went to this restaurant. I was in the bathroom. They sat down. I came out of the bathroom. Boom, there it was. We have lunch, and then she's like, "You want to come to my house, meet my family?" And I'm like, "Sure." So I didn't have time to prepare, right? I'm going to Mick Foley's house. I don't get starstruck. Very, very seldom I get starstruck. I wasn't starstruck then. If I'm being honest, I wasn't a huge Mick Foley fan growing up. I didn't dislike him, but he just wasn't one of my guys.
And hearing what you've told me at the beginning of the show, like you were a WCW guy. Right. You didn't get into that 2001 until Mick was already like retired for the first time out of his 30 retirements.
Right. Literally, my first WWF show I ordered was WrestleMania 17. He was a special guest referee. He wasn't an active wrestler. So so I go to the house. I play it cool. Like I know how to act in situations. And that was it. And I had my own hotel room. So like I wasn't expecting to like stay at her house and all that. That was the only time I ever stayed at a hotel. Every single time after I stayed at the house. But everything was super cool. Like he already knew me as Frank the Clown, which is weird. He didn't know anything beyond that, but he knew because again, I was going to a lot of shows. He saw the Clown. I had met him as a fan numerous times. So he already knew the name. He was aware, which is kind of weird. But like, I didn't want to like go into the house and be like, I'm this huge wrestling fan. Oh my God. Like, I don't think I talked wrestling once with him. And she has, her brothers were much littler at the time. Now they're giant beasts.
Yeah. And I've only ever talked to Dewey. I've never talked to the other two.
Yeah, so you would have no either because they're not like social media guys.
Yeah.
But yeah, they I don't even know if Dewey. I think Dewey had already moved out at this point because he was at school or something. He lived in Texas, so he wasn't there when I first met them. But yeah, and really like the rest was history. I then saw her again at WrestleMania 30 in New Orleans, and then from that point forward, we're like, all right, we're gonna do this, right? And she's like,
so when did you officially ask her out?
Yeah, it was April 7th, 2014. So it was the night after WrestleMania 30. What's funny was
your own Miracle on Bourbon Street,
dude. And like we were out at like some of the bars there, like Razoo's was like the place to be that WrestleMania trip, especially. And I remember like there's a lot of like wrestlers there. That was always the go-to place. And like people, obviously, we were like very PDA with each other at this point. And I remember Heath Slater, who I like a friend to this day. I was with him years and years before, even before he debuted in WWE. I knew him, so like he pulled me aside, and I'll never forget it. He's like, "Look, man," he's like, "if you fuck with her and break her heart, it's like me and the boys are gonna beat your ass." And I'm like, "Oh, cool, you got it, dude. I'm a good guy. You know, I'm a good guy. Like I'll treat her with respect. You know that." And he didn't like know her other than that. He was just kind of being like, you know, kind of busting my balls, but kind of not busting my balls at the same time. But I'll never forget that talk.
Well, like obviously all the boys in a sense have a ton of respect for Mick Foley, and that's his daughter. And it's like, you know, you mess with Mick's daughter, like we know of you, you're the clown guy. But if you mess with Mick's daughter,
they knew me.
Kick your ass. Don't be using this for clout or some shit. Like you better be serious about this.
They thought people I'm sure thought like, oh, you're just trying to take advantage, like you're trying to like, you know, work the system and all that, which I wasn't at all. And like, that's the thing, like you said, like wrestlers didn't know how to act around her. Like they were like scared to hug her. Like they just like didn't want it blowing back on them because she's like, you know, a very good looking, attractive young girl. And
at that age.
Don't exactly. And like, they just didn't want to be in a weird predicament. So yeah, a lot of people like obviously went to bat for her and like reached out to me and all that. But like the people who knew me knew like I was a good guy and like I, you know, was going to treat her with respect and I'm not some sleazeball, contrary to popular belief. But yeah, that's when it really all started kicking off.